Greetings, fellow Americans. Welcome to Fireside Chat's State of Our Nation. I am your host, Susanna Tanner, candidate for House of Representatives 2026 and President 2028. Last week, we went over some of the National Housing Construction Project, and I mentioned this week we were going to be going over the Secure America Infrastructure and Services Act. Now, there are some important aspects of this legislation that I believe the people need to know about first. I'm going to read you part of it, the beginning part of it, and we're going to go over some of the aspects about the lockboxes. Congress should find the following: the long-term fiscal stability and economic security of the United States are dependent on a fully funded, permanently sustainable federal government that prioritizes the welfare and economic mobility of its citizens. The existing structure of federal revenue generation is excessively complex, inefficient, and fails to yield the required funding to operate the government without chronic deficits, budget instability, and systemic vulnerabilities. A total structural reform of the federal financial system is required to replace the existing complex tax code with a single, sufficient, and simplified progressive revenue mechanism designed explicitly to meet the $9.4129 trillion revenue requirement needed to fully fund the government operations and establish a permanent stability reserve. So this is what is needed to bring us into a surplus, to ensure accountability and shield critical services from political appropriations cycles. A national lockbox system consisting of multiple dedicated non-discretionary funds must be established to transparently manage and allocate 100% of federal expenditures for the long-term support of the people. The purposes of this act are to enact a total systemic restructuring of the federal government's financial architecture by establishing the National Progressive Revenue Contribution, a single simplified progressive tax structure designed and mandated to achieve the $9.4129 trillion revenue requirement necessary to fully fund the entire federal government and generate a dedicated stability reserve. To establish and mandate the transparent, non-discretionary funding of the national lockbox system consisting of multiple legally shielded accounts to ensure that 100% of the NPRC revenue is dedicated and allocated for specific long-term government functions that directly support the people. To create a self-correcting revenue mechanism subject to a guaranteed sunset clause and quadrennial review to ensure permanent fiscal responsibility, system efficiency, and the automatic termination of the mechanism upon demonstration of inefficiency or failure to meet the Act's core objectives. To establish a mandatory progressive implementation plan for essential services to relieve economic stress and ensure a stable and supportive transition to the new funding model. To establish a framework for the transparent public accounting, effective execution, and measurable outcomes of all expenditures made from the national lockbox system. Now, there is definitely auditing with every project that I put out. So, the Comptroller General, it's a little bit of a tongue twister, of the United States shall conduct an annual, independent, and comprehensive audit of the financial status and operational efficiency of the NLS and all lockbox accounts. Public reporting. The audit required under this subsection shall be submitted to Congress and made publicly available in a clear and accessible format, not later than 90 days after the end of each fiscal year. The public report shall include a section detailing any instance of noncompliance with the allocation mandate and shall recommend immediate corrective action to Congress. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the lockbox system, some specifics about the lockbox system. There are 11 lockboxes. The first 10 are mandated. They are non-negotiable. The first lockbox is the National Defense and Security lockbox. Next, you have the Universal Social Security and Retirement lockbox. Next is Universal Healthcare. The National Infrastructure and Services lockbox as well. The Education and Research lockbox. The Essential Veterans and First Responder Services lockbox. The Public Debt and Interest Management lockbox. That's an important one because we have some outside debts that our nation needs to take care of. The Economic and Innovation Development lockbox, specifically for research and development, making sure that we are able to advance with our technology and provide a little extra for different projects we're working on. And then, of course, the Environmental Protection and Disaster Relief lockbox. The General Government and Regulatory Services lockbox. Those are the first 10. The 11th one I'm going to get into here in just a few minutes. The allocation of these lockboxes must be 100%. There is also a 25% buffer for each lockbox so that it ensures operational ability, so that when there is a government shutdown, it doesn't put these services at risk. It keeps them flowing, it keeps them going, and appropriations will be permanent, more permanent for these. It will not be subjected to the annual cycle. Now, there is an investment prohibition here. The assets of the lockbox accounts may be invested only in interest-bearing obligations of the United States or in obligations guaranteed as to both principal and interest by the United States. No funds may be invested in private securities, equities, or foreign government obligations. Basically, the government would be able to invest in our banks, into certificates of deposits and such. It's restricted because there shouldn't be any gambling with our tax dollars, and that's what those particular investments, private securities and equities and foreign government obligations, those are all a gamble. So it's important that our funds are secure and not subject to such a volatile market. I hope that makes sense. So that being said, each lockbox must receive its mandated allocation. There's no lapsing of lockbox funds into the general fund. Otherwise, we would not be able to secure our financial future. All of these lockboxes are set the way that they are set so that the general fund is not needed to appropriate these particular services. Funds shall be released from each lockbox account to the respective executive branch agencies only upon the verification that the funds are for the execution of the full funding mandate of that specific lockbox. The mandatory allocation amount required for each lockbox account is fixed, non-negotiable. As far as what can be allocated to them, they're set up this way, particularly so that everything is funded, because everything has to be paid for. And I'll thank President Bill Clinton for saying that during his debate for his second term. I find that to be very valuable advice, a very valuable statement. The total annual funding target for lockboxes 1 through 10 is 9.0629 trillion and is exclusively funded by the NPRC, the National Progressive Revenue Contribution. The Stability Reserve in Lockbox 7, now that one has some specific allocations. Its minimum funding for Lockbox 11 is 0.35 trillion, so around 350 billion, and is exclusively funded by the Secure America Corporate Alternative Minimum Tax. So with this particular set of lockboxes, when the episode is released, I'll have a beautiful little graph that you can see that will show how each particular lockbox will be allocated. As you'll be able to see the percents and stuff like that. Right now, the most expensive allocation is the Universal Healthcare lockbox. Its allocation is $2.1 trillion, and that's including the 25% buffer. The actual base is $1.68 trillion. That is a lot for our healthcare. Right now, that's what we need. Eventually, the Universal Healthcare lockbox will not need quite as much for the allocation, and that will be just fine because we can expand and utilize some of this for emergency purposes, expanding our nation, correcting things we need to correct. Universal Social Security and Retirement lockbox, that's the next highest one. It's 1.8 trillion, and that's including the 25% buffer. This is important because, like I said a few weeks ago with it, it raises the Social Security minimum that anyone can receive on Social Security to $2,000. That is enough to support an individual without putting them into poverty. Now, the Universal Healthcare lockbox, we're going to go over how that's going to be funded initially, because until we put into place the universal healthcare system, we still have to make sure that all of our healthcare needs are accounted for. So this full funding is non-discretionary. It shields healthcare from the political games that we have seen very recently our Congress has been implementing. Playing with our livelihoods is not really something we're all too keen on, I'm pretty sure. Now, the cost of Medicare is around $839 billion. That's mandatory spending. And it will be financed by, or right now it's financed by payroll taxes and premiums. So what we're going to be doing is folding all of this all of the cost of Medicare right into these lockboxes to make sure that they are fully funded. Medicaid and CHIP together are around $584 billion, and other federal health care spending is around $477 billion. This includes things for veterans health, NIH, CDC, and other public health programs. This totals, all 11 lockboxes total $1.9 trillion. And there is a buffer in the 11th lockbox of $475 billion. That's going to allow us to utilize that for anything that we may need to use it for. Disaster services, expanding other programs that we might not have full funding for out of the lockbox itself. So it is important to utilize all of our funding for the things that we need. We will have an immense amount of education material. We're going to be able to basically soup up our curriculum and make sure that our students have the best education that we can give them. And right now, that is not what we're giving them. Unfortunately, state by state, with something like education, makes our national education too erratic and not consistent. So it's important for us to change that. The annual funding for lockbox, the universal healthcare lockbox, is $2.35 trillion. This way, oh, I messed up. So the 2.375 trillion is for the universal healthcare lockbox, but that's including the buffer. And funding it through this new tax system will make it fully available to most citizens. The only things that this universal health care will not cover is cosmetic surgery. Cosmetic surgery is purely that, cosmetic. There are certain types of surgery that, even though they're cosmetic, they're necessary to help a person have a fuller and healthier life, such as a rhinoplasty, where you have to have cosmetic surgery to reconstruct what's in your sinuses so that you can breathe better and such. So different things like that are part of the universal healthcare system. However, purely cosmetic for looks only is not covered. Unfortunately, this also means that actual transgender surgeries would not be covered. Things that would be covered related to that would be regular doctor's visits, certain medications, mental health professional care, and other things like that. But the actual surgery itself would not be covered. Now, this might not be pleasing to everyone, but realistically speaking, putting this together, I cannot justify covering transgender physical surgeries with this system. The universal healthcare system is meant to keep you healthy physically and mentally. However, pending something that would require a gender change in order to preserve life, that's going to be a really iffy statement. There has to be medical evidence, physical medical evidence, that a transgender or a gender changing surgery would physically save the life of a person. And there can be a lot of argument in that in courts in the future. And some may win, some may lose. It's going to depend on how we all decide to take this. But again, I cannot justify covering gender change surgery with this particular setup. I am open to discussion about it, but it would take some very big convincing for me to want to physically cover that. I just want to make sure that that's clear. This does not cover physical gender change surgeries, cosmetic surgeries. Now, we do seem to have a national desire for universal health care. This is how it's paid for. After the first year, or after the first of the year, I will be talking more about the universal healthcare system and how it will work once it's implemented. I do have the proposal for the link, or the proposal link in the comments for everyone to read. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but in the bottom right-hand corner, my website is on the screen. I hope I've given you guys some things to think about. This tax restructuring will have a really positive effect on all of us, and that's from the lowest of incomes to the most wealthy of us, financially wealthy. So I hope that's something to think about, and that is all I have for today. Thank you for your time, and may our path lead to peace and prosperity.